Hey everybody, here is my sourdough video, how to make sourdough. This recipe will do 2 country loaves based on the tartine recipe, although I have tried loads of other recipes. This is kind of my favorite right now. It'll produce something which looks like this, and I'm going to keep it short, simple, direct. I'm not going to mess around. I want you to enjoy yourself while you do this and just learn a little bit of stuff. We begin with a starter, and this one here in this kiln jar is 5 years old. Essentially all it is flour and water, and you chuck away half and then you feed it with equal parts water and flour. I usually do a bit of whole wheat flour and then a bit of white flour as well. You will want to develop a mature starter before you begin baking your loaves. It should take you about 5 or 7 days to get to full maturity. Keep feeding it every couple of days when I'm running up to a bake, sometimes twice a day, just so it's really mature, bubbling away, ready to go. So you've got a mature starter and you want to make a leaven. This is like the day before the real work occurs, and the leaven is basically like the mother dough. It's kind of like the pre-dough, like a catalyst for the actual baking itself. Add 200 milliliters of water at 26 degrees Celsius. Add 100 grams of whole grain or wholemeal flour and 100 grams of white strong bread flour. Then add a tablespoon of your starter. Give it a good mix. What I want to do now is cling film over it. You can use a tea towel, and you're going to leave it overnight so it ferments a little bit, so it gets kind of really glutinous. And it's very, very important that this stage is done properly, because you're going to see the results later on in the bake. You'll then start to see activity underneath. Sometimes I leave it longer in the morning just to bubble away. And you want to take a tablespoon or a teaspoon, a small amount, stick it in water. If it floats, it's ready to go. It's full of air. We are now ready to make the main dough itself. Weigh 700 milliliters of 26 degree Celsius water. I always use a digital thermometer for this, and I think it's essential because, again, if it's a really cold environment, you're going to struggle with the development of the dough. Add 200 grams of the leaven to the water. Any excess can be returned back to the starter jar. Then give it a quick mix so it resembles a thin porridge consistency. Now we're going to move on to our dry mix. Our dry mix consists of a total of a kilogram of flour. We need to weigh 900 grams of strong white flour and 100 grams of wholemeal or whole grain flour. So now we're going to move on to adding the dry mix to the wet mix. Simple as that. Just pour it in and then give it a good old mix. So during the mix, you're going to use your hands. It's going to get wet and sticky, but at least then you'll be able to feel the dough, see how it reacts. It will get sticky, so use the dough scraper here. I've got a nice blue one on the side there, and you can scrape it off your hands and then the job is done. The dough is ready to autolyze for 35-45 minutes. It basically helps the initial gluten develop, and it lets it rest after mixing. So while that's autolyzing, you want to measure 20 grams of salt and 50 milliliters of warm water. After the resting period, you're going to want to add your salt straight on top of the dough like this, and then you're going to add your water straight on top as well. This is the start, or at least the beginnings of the bulk fermentation phase. There's only one way to get down to it really, and that is to get in there, grab and squish to incorporate the salt with the water. Now that 50 ml now brings us up to 750 milliliters of water with moisture in total, which gives us our 75% hydration. So once you've squished that all together, it will reform to itself and therefore start to ferment in its major phase of fermentation. What I want you to do is to then put it in a glass bowl, and I do this because I want to see the fermentation while it proves. The first thing you want to do before we leave it to bulk ferment is to give it a first fold, and that basically starts off that gluten structure to develop. Also, what I do here is I cover it. I tend to cover it with a wooden chopping board or something, just so it doesn't develop a skin on top, and also it keeps all the moisture inside. Something I've been doing recently is trying to create sort of a proving drawer to control the ambient temperature. I use my oven for this by keeping it off and then adding a tray of boiling water below just to keep the ambient temperature high. Then every so often refresh the boiling water to maintain that temperature. After the first half hour, you want to take it out of the oven and you'll want to fold it again, and you'll want to do this every half an hour until 4 hours is up. When we fold, we're going to try and just lift and stretch and turn the bowl, lift and stretch. It's important to wet your fingers during this process as well, because it's going to get a bit sticky, but that's fine. Once you've finished, you just wash your hands. After 2 hours or so, you will notice the dough gains more structure and holds its shape a lot better. This is the reason to use a glass bowl or container, because we can see the bubbles and therefore determine the state of activity. When 4 hours is up, you want to give it a final fold before you move on to the next step, but be very gentle once again, because it is very, very voluminous and full of air. It should be about 20 to 30% bigger than it was 4 hours ago, and if not, make sure you give it a bit longer and keep folding, because you want to make sure that you got that volume, that rise, that fermentation. I tend to dump the whole thing onto an unfloured surface. Grab your dough scraper and your strong white flour, flour the top of the dough, and then cut it into two with your scraper. So once you've cut them in two, you're going to have to flip them onto the floured side so that the unfloured side faces upwards. Once you've flipped your dough, you want to try initially shaping it, and there's a couple of ways to do this, but the easiest way is just to get your hands in there. Now, flour those hands because it's going to get really sticky. I'm using 2 hands in this video, but you can use 1 hand and a dough scraper, it might be easier. So you're going to have these hands going in different directions, so one goes up and one goes down, one goes up, one goes down, because you want to try and create a sort of round ball shape that creates tension in the dough itself, leaving the outer layer slightly wet and shiny and keeping the edges kind of rounded towards the surface of the workbench. So now we're done with the first one. After all that rotating, we've got the tension that we require, and then we'll move on to the one on the right. It's a better example here in this video, I think, of my technique. Again, using 2 hands just to turn, and then create that structure. Once they're both done, we have to do the bench rest. Now the bench rest is very important. We give it 20 minutes and we have to wait for that rest. While resting, let's prepare the bannetons. I use a mix of rice flour and bread flour. The best way to distribute the flour around the banneton is you can either let the gravity do the work or get your hands in there. Ultimately, just make sure there's plenty of flour in there so the dough will not stick to it when you take it out later. After the bench rest, we're going to have to do the final shaping. And now the final shaping is crucial when it comes to the structure of the dough, especially when you put it into your banneton. So lightly flour the top of your dough and then flip them right over onto the floured side so that the unfloured side is facing up. Grab and fold the bottom of the dough 2/3 up. Then drag and fold the right side inwards to itself, and then the same with the left. Bring the top side towards you and then pinch together at the bottom and roll over into a ball. This next one shows better technique. Bottom, right, left, top, and fold over. Once you've got your dough rested, you want to stick it in your bannetons. I must have forgot to film that first one, but you literally lift it up from the underside and then flip it upside down and put it in your banneton, and there we go. So now you can just either leave it out for 3 or 4 hours in a warm room, or you can cover it up overnight in a fridge for about 8 to 12 hours. That gives it a better taste, better sourness to it, and actually it's easier for my schedule. Time to bake. Get your Dutch oven out, make sure that it has a lid, it's essential. Cut up some greaseproof paper or baking parchment into a circle, then pop it right in. I want to stick it in the oven at 250, high as possible, so it preheats for 20 minutes at the very least before your bake. So I've taken my banneton and dough out of the fridge. You can see that it's risen. It's got a voluminous feel to it. And I want to sprinkle it over with a bit of rice flour. Now the edges are very important because you want to pull this out slowly so it doesn't stick to the edge of the banneton. Drop the dough into the preheated pan. If you're having trouble here, then the banneton isn't floured enough. Score your bread at a slight angle in any shape you want. I do a cross here. Pop the lid on and bang it in the oven for 20 minutes at 230. Once that's done, take the lid off the Dutch oven and then give it another 15 to 25 minutes at 230. It's very important because you want to try and get that colour to the dough now that it's steamed and baked and expanded in its size. And here we have the dough that we just baked, and as you can see it looks very attractive. It even has some sort of nice interesting round shapes around it. That's just the activity of the bubbles inside. You don't have to cut your dough straight away, but sometimes it's nice just to see what the crumb structure looks like. And in this instance, it looks really good. You've got a good sort of variation of holes. There's a good rise, and you can see that beautiful M&S style steam coming off it. Let's not forget that we actually have another piece of dough, so you'll want to get your Dutch oven preheated one more time and then pop in the dough for the next bake. Let's do a different scoring this time. I'm going to make it a square just because it looks different, quite a nice traditional look. Here we have the second loaf, square scored at the top. I'm going to use my spatulas to get it out. Stick it on the wooden chopping board to rest before I cut this one, because I kind of like to leave it a bit longer. It usually cuts easier after a rest. I'm really pleased with the result here, and for something novel, if you hold it up to your ear and you can hear it crackle, that's just because the crust is still baking essentially. It sounds like this. Thanks for watching, guys. You've made it this far. Good effort. This has been a bit of fun. Hopefully it's been informative and you can go off and make some nice bread yourself now. Pop me any questions and show me your bread. And thanks, guys, again. See you soon.